Hey, welcome back to Everyday Economics. This is the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug. I'm CEO of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics, production of America's Talking Network, and you can check out all of our podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make a tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Friday, December 6th, and joining me, as always, my friend and colleague, the ubiquitous Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD. You're an economist. That's a big job. Speaking of jobs, the job report came out on Friday, and the numbers are pretty good. I mean, of course, we had a pretty lackluster October report. The report we're talking about is for November. It came in at 227,000 in the first estimate. Of course, October's number was pretty scary. That, as we discussed, driven by storms and, the natural disasters that sort of plagued, the Southeast. I think that when they got to the final count, maybe it was 12,000 total jobs added in October. That number was originally reported at 16. I think it was revised to 14. And I saw somewhere that it had been further revised to 12. But we came in at 227 for November. What's it mean?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good jobs report. I think, we have kind of stable employment gains, stable wage growth. Things are looking more and more like they did before the pandemic. And so, you got wage growth at 4% year over year, which is higher than before the pandemic, but with the increase in productivity, the productivity gains that we got as of late, wage growth at 4% is essentially consistent with a 2% inflation. You have employment gains at 227,000 jobs last month, a little more than the 181,000 pre-pandemic employment gain, with private sector employment growth rebounding from negative a month ago to the normal 1.3% year over year pace that we basically observed before the pandemic. So again, things look more and more normal. And so that's kind of the way I see it. Of course, the Fed's going to continue is going to move ahead and normalize policy with another rate cut in December. And I think part of the reason for that is, and you alluded to it a little bit before we got on the show, before we started the show, is this idea that, okay, even if we made up for the October lackluster jobs report, perhaps employment growth could stall, right, going forward. And so the Fed sees that and says, okay, things look normal. Let's keep things normal going forward.
So, all right. So I'm pulling up the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, right? Because I think everybody gets excited about the overall number. Let's kind of cut into this a little bit, right? So in November, of the 227,000 jobs, healthcare added 54,000 of those jobs, which is in line with the average monthly gain. And I'm reading this straight from the BLS report. The average monthly gain in the prior 12 months had been about 59,000. In November, ambulatory healthcare services added 22,000 jobs, led by a gain of 16,000 in home healthcare services. Employment also increased in hospitals. That was 19,000. And then nursing and residential care facilities. Now, some portion of those jobs are private sector jobs. Some portion of those jobs are public sector jobs. And so they're government jobs. So has the government turned the spending aimed at employment back on? What's your take on the data?
Look, the employment, when you look at government employment relative to the pre-pandemic period, it was still catching up, right? So it's not like government employment was outpacing the pre-pandemic gains. It's still playing catch up. The healthcare sector, which basically had been plagued with massive labor shortages, also playing catch up. I haven't looked at the latest number and wondering if it's actually caught up already by now. But ultimately, I'm not necessarily concerned. What I'm happy to see though is that when you look at private sector employment gains, they're basically on a year-over-year basis. On that, right? If you look at the last month annualized, the last 3 months, 6 months, they're looking pretty much on track with where they
Okay.
were before the pandemic.
Okay. So the other data, there are a couple other data points that jump out, and so in the actual BLS report, they say that like straight government employment continues to trend up, 33,000 of those jobs, and so when you and I have talked about this, I've just tapped the brakes on optimism for the overall growth of jobs in the United States, because I mean even a private sector job could be funded by some public policy, right? But there is another point of data that exists out there that's interesting. Of the jobs in this report, 32,000 of them are directly linked to the people who were working in the automotive and transportation industry who had been on strike who returned to work. So 32,000 of the 227 are
Right.
reflective of people who had jobs, and technically by the way that we report on jobs lost and gained, didn't have a job while they were on strike, now have a job again. So it's not like they're new. They're new statistically, but they're not new jobs.
That still brings you at 195,000 job gain, right?
That's good
Which
math. That's
which
good
is
math, like right on the spot there, friend.
which is still much higher, much slightly higher than the pre-pandemic pace, right? And so that's what I mean. We were gaining about 181,000 jobs a month before the pandemic. And so, if you tell me 195,000 jobs, additional jobs, I say, hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna kick you too hard on that. Appreciate your thoughts as always.
Pleasure,
Interesting jobs
as
report.
always.
For Dr. Rowe, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high quality podcasts at americastalking.com.